The real terror in The Thing isn't that one of these men might be infected. It's what happens the moment they realize any one of them could be infected. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because we all watched it happen during COVID. People who had trusted each other for years suddenly began looking at one another as a possible threat, and friends and family turned on each other because the person standing across from them might be carrying something they couldn't see. And that's the engine underneath this movie. The infection is the physical threat, but suspicion is what destroys the community. And that's the real horror at the center of John Carpenter's The Thing. Hi, I'm Matthew Lawrence. I've been a filmmaker and editor for over 30 years. Welcome to The Rough Cut. There's a reason so much horror happens somewhere far away from help, because once you remove the larger community, the people trapped inside become one another's only chance of surviving. And in The Thing, Carpenter takes that isolation about as far as he can. For all practical purposes, the rest of humanity no longer exists. Trust is more than what holds this group together. Their lives depend on it, because if something goes wrong, well, nobody else is coming. Which is why I think the first real break happens before anyone suspects another man. It happens when they let that dog into the camp. A dog is familiar. It looks harmless, so the creature never has to attack the station or force its way through a locked door. They let it inside because it arrives in a form they already trust. And the instinct to protect something vulnerable is what puts the threat inside the community. Carpenter takes his time setting this up, more time than I think he needs, and the way he stages that buildup is where my feelings about this movie get more complicated. Now, this is where Carpenter and I start to separate a little bit, because his instinct is to build a wide frame and let the actors carry the scene inside it. And that isn't accidental. Carpenter has come out of that Howard Hawks tradition, and Dean Cundey has said they deliberately used the anamorphic frame because this is an ensemble movie, and Carpenter wanted one shot to do as much of the work as possible. That is a real directing choice, but it comes with a trade-off. When you hold a scene that way, you hand the timing over to the actors. The pace has to be created inside the performance because you aren't using the edit to shorten a pause or to stay on a reaction or decide when the audience should move from one face to another. As an editor, those are some of the most powerful tools I have for controlling how an audience feels, and Carpenter often refuses to use them. For me, especially during the first half, that can make the movie feel less cinematic and more like television or stage theater. When a performance isn't carrying the timing, I start feeling the length of the setup instead of getting pulled deeper into the tension. You can see the strength of this approach when they burn Bennings in the snow. Holding that group together makes the moment feel almost ceremonial because the entire community has to witness it at the same time. But at the blood test, the method that felt limiting becomes the scene's greatest strength. The blood test turns this movie inside out. When the stored blood is sabotaged, these men lose the one piece of evidence they thought could tell them who was still human. The actual test gives MacReady a process, and for the first time, it feels like they may be able to identify the enemy. The tension begins long before anything jumps out of the dish. Carpenter establishes a procedure and lets us learn its rhythm. Heat the wire, touch the blood, nothing happens, move to the next sample and do it again. Every negative result settles the room a little bit more until the blood reacts and breaks the pattern he has been teaching us. Here, Carpenter's held frame approach is exactly right for the material. These men are tied down together, the geography stays clear, and we watch the panic move through the group in real time. Cutting faster might have made it more frantic, but keeping everyone together makes the fear communal. They all watch the same friend stop being human at the same moment. Then the practical effect erupts inside that space. And look, gore is not my thing, especially when we get into blood, organs, and all the things red. But the creature work here is completely off the chain for 1982. Rob Bottin's effects reportedly consumed about $1.5 million of a $15 million budget, and you can see where the money went. There are moments where the 4K image reveals some of the prosthetic work underneath, but it still holds up because Carpenter and Dean Cundey let us see the creatures without exposing every inch of them, We get enough light to read the texture and movement, and then the effect is allowed to perform. And one thing that struck me as I was watching it, it's one thing to spend months building these creatures, it's something else to shoot them, tear them apart, blow them up, and set all that work on fire. The destruction is part of the effect. But the blood test doesn't restore trust. It proves their distrust was justified. And after that, being human is no longer enough to make anybody trustworthy. By the time MacReady and Childs sit across from one another, nothing remains that could prove either man is human. The blood is gone, the test is gone, the station is burning, and nobody is coming to help. All they have left is each other, which after everything that has happened is the one thing neither man can trust. That's why the ambiguous ending works for me. Sometimes ambiguity is just a filmmaker who doesn't know how to land the plane, so the movie cuts away and leaves the audience to finish the job. But I don't think that's what Carpenter is doing here. If he identifies Childs as the thing, or somehow confirms that both men are still human, he restores certainty to a movie that has spent nearly 2 hours dismantling it. The question isn't which man is infected anymore, it's whether each one can afford to believe the other isn't. Mac has already accepted that nobody is likely to make it out, and the ending allows that condition to continue. They can cooperate and risk trusting the thing, or they can refuse to trust each other and freeze to death together. It reminds me of the ending of The Sopranos, where we don't necessarily reach the end of a life or even the end of the story. The audience is simply asked to leave. Whatever happens next continues without us, and that uncertainty follows us home. The compound has been such a complete connected world that watching it burn feels like the community itself disappearing. There is no safe room and no larger group. Carpenter leaves these men inside the wind and fire with only silence between them. Knowing which man is the thing wouldn't repair anything now, because trust is already gone. So does the thing still hold up? Yes. Although not every part of it does. Carpenter is still not one of my favorite directors, and some of the acting is thin. The first half takes longer to get moving than I think it needs to. And oddly enough, the canned punches and gunshots date the movie faster than the creature effects. But the film still looks phenomenal. Once Carpenter reaches the blood test, his method earns everything the movie has been building towards. The creature is only the physical horror. What survives is the distrust it leaves behind. And after COVID, well, that idea feels even more real now than it could have in 1982. I'm Matthew Lawrence. This has been The Rough Cut, a filmmaker's perspective with no apologies. So, do you think Childs is the thing? And would knowing actually make the ending any better? If you made it this far, drop something in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If this is the kind of breakdown you came for, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the edit room.